The weather report reaches London before dawn, folded into a thin folder that feels too light for what it carries. In a secure room, under blackout curtains and dim lamps, the words are simple: wind, cloud, swell, timing. Yet every line points to the same conclusion. The channel is turning against the plan. Winston Churchill is already awake. He sits with a cigar near his hand and a red dispatch box on the table, but he does not touch either. He reads the forecast once, then again, slower, as if repetition might change it. For months he has lived with one thought: the invasion will be won or lost before the first rifle is fired, by weather, timing, and nerve. The invasion date is not a preference. It is a narrow corridor, moonlight for airborne navigation, a low tide at first light to expose obstacles, enough daylight for coordination. If they miss the corridor, they do not simply try tomorrow. The next acceptable window shifts by weeks, weeks in which an army the size of a city must remain hidden, fed, fueled, and quiet. Churchill knows what that means. The enemy may not know the exact date, but the enemy can feel the pressure building. More movement along rail lines, more ships and landing craft clustered in ports, more aircraft activity. The longer the Allies hover on the edge, the more chances there are for a pattern to be noticed, for a rumour to travel, for a small mistake to become a warning. And yet the sea does not care about secrecy. It cares about wind. It cares about waves. It cares about whether a landing craft can hold course long enough to arrive where it must. Churchill pushes the folder across the table to his advisers, then leans back and lets the room speak first. It is not a crowded meeting, but it is heavy with consequence. The forecast suggests a storm system moving into the channel, low cloud that could blind the air plan, rough seas that could wreck the timing of the first wave. The words are clinical, the implications are not. Someone asks what Eisenhower thinks. The answer is honest. Eisenhower is waiting on the meteorologists and the commanders in his own war room at Southwick House. He must decide whether to go into imperfect conditions or delay and risk losing the window entirely. Churchill listens, and a familiar irritation rises in him, not at Eisenhower, not at the plan, but at the idea that nature has been given a vote in the most important operation of the war. He has always believed that boldness matters, that momentum matters, that delay can be more dangerous than action, but he also knows a hard truth from years of war. Boldness is not the same as recklessness. He asks for specifics, not speeches, not reassurance, specifics. What is the predicted wind speed? How low is the cloud base expected to be? What does rough mean in terms of landing craft? The answers tighten the room. Rough means men arriving late and sick. Rough means radio soaked and timing slipping. Rough means engineers clearing obstacles under worse conditions with less margin. Low cloud means bombers may not see targets and may miss or be forced to change tactics. High wind means airborne drops, critical to sealing the flanks, could scatter into confusion. Churchill turns his gaze to the wall map, where the channel is a band of dark water between England and France. He has stared at that strip for years, thinking of it as both barrier and doorway. Now it feels like a locked gate, and the key is a forecast that may be wrong by a few hours. Hours that would decide everything. This is the moment Churchill's voice changes, not louder, sharper. He says what he truly fears, not defeat in battle, but failure of timing. The Allies have one advantage that cannot be replaced. the element of surprise at the strategic level. If the invasion hesitates too long, the enemy will not need to guess. The enemy will simply prepare everywhere, and preparation everywhere turns every beach into a stronger wall. But then he says the other half, the part that makes the room go quiet. If the weather breaks the first wave, no amount of courage can repair the schedule. The sea can scatter craft. The sky can separate formations. The plan can arrive in fragments instead of force. That is how invasions fail, not by lack of bravery, but by lack of coherence. Churchill exhales slowly and reaches for the cigar at last, not to smoke, but to hold something steady in his hand. He speaks as if he is addressing the report itself. This is the enemy we cannot bomb. Weather. Someone reminds him that the forecast is not certainty. Weather can shift. It can surprise. Churchill's eyes narrow. That is exactly the problem. The entire operation is now balanced on probability, and probability is a poor substitute for control. He wants to send a message to Eisenhower, but he understands the danger of it. Eisenhower must own the decision in his own war room. Too much pressure from London becomes noise, and noise kills judgment. Yet Churchill also knows this is one of those rare moments where a few words from the political leader might steady the alliance rather than complicate it. He dictates a short note, careful, supportive, and unmistakably urgent. The weather is turning. The window is narrow. Delay has consequences. But so does rushing into conditions that can unravel the operation. The note does not tell Eisenhower what to do. It reminds him what is at stake. When the message is sent, Churchill is left with nothing to do but wait for another report, another chart, another estimate, another attempt to read the Atlantic like an oracle. He sits very still, because he knows the next hours will separate history into two versions, one where the Allies cross in time and one where they do not. The room remains quiet. Outside, London is dark. Across the Channel, France is darker, and in both places the weather moves without caring who is ready. The message to Eisenhower is gone, carried away into the Allied system, where every sentence becomes a chain of actions. Churchill remains in the room and stares at the empty space it left behind, as if the air itself is now waiting for a reply. Another folder arrives, another weather update. The forecast is not improving in the way a man hopes when he has bet everything on a single morning. The Channel is still restless. The cloud is still low. The wind still threatens to push aircraft off course and landing craft out of alignment. Churchill taps the table once with the cigar, not as a gesture of impatience, but as a way to mark time, because time is now the enemy that keeps growing stronger. Every hour of delay means more men held in sealed camps, more ships idling, more fuel burned, more chances for error. It also means a quieter, more dangerous thing. It means minds have time to imagine failure, and imagined failure spreads faster than any rumor. He asks what the Germans might be seeing. Not on the beaches. There is no way for them to see that yet. But across Europe, across airfields and ports, across the invisible layer of intelligence. Are they picking up unusual radio patterns? Are there reconnaissance flights noting anything unusual in the Channel? Are there agents hearing whispers in coastal towns? The answer is the worst kind of answer. Unknown. Unknown means risk. Churchill's mind moves to the alliance itself. He knows the invasion is not just an operation. It is a test of unity. The Americans have built an enormous machine and they want it used. The British have carried the war for years and they know what a failed operation can do to morale. Everyone has a different scar. Everyone has a different instinct. The weather is now forcing those instincts into the same room. He says quietly what he does not want anyone to forget. This is not about comfort. It is not about a nice day. It is about coherence. If the invasion arrives in pieces, the enemy can destroy it in pieces. If it arrives as force, even imperfect force, it can survive long enough to grow. A staff member mentions the narrow window again. If they miss it, the next viable combination of tide and moonlight shifts later. Churchill's eyes harden. Weeks is not just time. Weeks is pressure. Weeks is accidents. Weeks is the enemy learning. He has spent enough of his life watching plans rot in delay to know that every postponement changes the plan itself. Then comes the most dangerous thought of all. What if the weather forces Eisenhower to postpone once and then again? What if the invasion becomes a thing that keeps almost happening? In politics, repeated near misses destroy confidence. In war, they destroy secrecy. The Germans do not need perfect intelligence. They only need enough suspicion to concentrate reserves, to tighten coastal defences, to prepare the kill zones. Churchill stands and moves to the map. He traces the coast with a finger, stopping near Normandy. He does not speak for a moment. Then he says something with the weight of a warning and the calm of experience. A storm is not only weather. A storm is a schedule breaker. A storm is a formation destroyer. A storm is the kind of enemy that doesn't care if you deserve to win. Another update comes. This one from the Allied command, relayed through secure channels. Eisenhower has postponed the attempt by a day. The invasion is paused, not cancelled. Churchill absorbs the news without comment at first. A postponement is both relief and dread. Relief because the worst of the storm will not be met head-on. Dread because now the operation is balanced on an even thinner edge. He finally speaks, and what he says is not dramatic. It is practical, almost ruthless. A postponement buys time, but it spends secrecy. Therefore, the next decision must be fast. If a usable window appears, they must take it. Not because it will be perfect, but because perfection is no longer available. He asks for one thing immediately. He wants the next forecast as soon as it exists, not when it is polished, not when it is comforting, but when it is real. He tells the room, in plain terms, that the invasion is now a race between two forces, the weather, which may offer a brief opening, and the enemy's ability to notice that something enormous is waiting to move. A pause follows, and in that pause, Churchill's voice drops. He says that the most dangerous moment in a great operation is not the battle itself. It is the hesitation right before it, because hesitation is when doubts grow legs. It is when rumours escape. It is when fear feels useful. The war must not be allowed to turn the invasion into a question mark. Outside the room, London continues breathing under blackout. No crowds, no cheers, no sense that history is hovering above the city. But inside this small space, the weather report has already changed everything. It has taken the greatest operation of the war and reduced it to a narrow corridor of hours that may vanish. Churchill sits again and waits for the next chart, knowing that somewhere across the channel men are waiting too, only closer to the water, closer to the point where weather stops being a forecast and becomes a force. The postponement changes the rhythm of everything. It turns a single strike into a suspended moment, and suspended moments create pressure. Churchill feels that pressure in a way few people can, because he is not only thinking about Normandy, he is thinking about Parliament, about allies, about morale, about the long memory of a war that has punished false starts. He moves between rooms where maps cover walls and papers stack like sandbags. Every update is a new calculation, not only what the weather might do, but what waiting might do to the story of the war. Delay can look like caution. Delay can also look like doubt. Churchill has spent years fighting the second meaning. He asks again for the forecast and again for the forecast, until the staff learns to bring it without being asked. The channel is still rough, the sky is still low, but the storm is moving. Moving is the key word. Not clearing, not improving. Moving. Because if it moves at the right speed, it leaves behind a thin opening. Churchill does not pretend he understands the charts like the meteorologists do. He understands something else. He understands decisions made under uncertainty. He tells the room that the enemy they can't bomb is now dictating the tempo, and that tempo is everything. If the opening appears, the decision cannot drift. It has to land. A message arrives from Allied headquarters. Eisenhower is watching for a possible break late on the 5th into the early hours of the 6th. The words are cautious, but Churchill hears the meaning. The war room in England is not waiting for a perfect day anymore. It is waiting for a usable one. Churchill's response is immediate, and it is not dramatic. He tells his people that the alliance must speak with one voice. No public uncertainty, no hints, no loose talk. If the date shifts, it must shift silently. If the date holds, it must hold completely. The operation cannot afford a half commitment. Then he does something that reveals the private side of his anxiety. He argues again that he should go to sea with the fleet. He has been insisting on it for weeks. Not because he wants to meddle with commanders, but because he believes the leader must share the risk, must be seen sharing it, and must not hide in London while others cross the water. His advisers push back. The king pushes back. The generals push back. The argument is always the same. If Churchill is killed or captured, the entire political structure of the alliance shudders. He listens, frowns, and refuses to surrender the idea completely, even though he knows he probably will, because for him the invasion is personal. It is the answer to years of darkness. By late afternoon on June 5th, new weather notes come in. The break behind the storm looks more likely, still narrow, still uncertain, but the odds are shifting. Churchill's expression tightens into something like focus. He tells the room that the weather is now offering a bargain, a few hours of good enough in exchange for everything being done at once. If they accept the bargain, they accept the conditions with it. He requests confirmation of the one thing that matters more than the charts. Is Eisenhower prepared to commit, not to hope, to commit? Churchill knows this is where alliances can crack. One partner wants speed, another wants safety, another wants certainty that cannot exist. The leader in the centre must hold them together and still choose. That is why Churchill's next words, when he dictates another message, are carefully built. He offers support, not pressure. He offers unity, not advice. He makes it clear that London will stand behind the decision once it is made, because nothing destroys confidence like the sense that a commander has been pushed into a gamble alone. Night comes. The clocks matter again. The tide charts matter again. The moon matters again. Churchill sits with the weather report open in front of him, the lines and numbers now familiar, like an enemy's face. He does not look away for long. Somewhere in the dark, ships are waiting. Aircraft are being readied. Men are being held in silence so complete it feels unnatural. The operation is paused, but it is not sleeping. It is coiled. Then, close to midnight, a short message arrives from Southwick House. The break still looks real. Another briefing before dawn. A decision soon. Churchill reads it once, then sets it down gently, as if rough handling could offend the only opening they may get. He says quietly, to no one in particular, that the weather has turned the invasion into a single question. Not whether they can win, whether they can begin. Just before dawn, London is still wrapped in blackout and quiet, but the quiet feels different now, not peaceful, suspended. Churchill is seated when the next message arrives from Southwick House, and the way the courier holds it tells him everything before he reads a word. Eisenhower has made the decision. The window is thin, but it exists. The operation will go. Churchill reads the lines once, then again, as if repetition can make the meaning safer. It does not. It only makes it real. For a moment he does not speak. He simply looks down at the paper, and in his mind the channel stops being a strip of water and becomes a moving corridor of steel. Thousands of ships, tens of thousands of men, aircraft lifting into weather that still refuses to cooperate. Everything crossing because one commander in one room said one word. Churchill's first reaction is not celebration. It is relief sharpened by dread. Relief because hesitation has ended. Dread because now the war will answer. He turns to the men around him and says something that is almost a warning, spoken with the calm of someone who has watched too many plans meet reality. Now we shall see. He asks immediately what can still be influenced, not the landings themselves. That machinery is already moving, but the atmosphere around them, the way the nation will hold itself during the first hours. Churchill understands that morale can be damaged before any official announcement is made, by rumours, by careless words, by the anxious vacuum where people invent their own news. He orders discipline, silence where silence is required, control where control is still possible. Then he asks again, for the last time, to go, to be closer to the fleet, closer to the moment. The answer is still no. Not because anyone doubts his courage, because his courage is not the question. The question is what happens to Britain if its Prime Minister becomes a casualty on the morning history turns. Churchill accepts the refusal like a man swallowing a stone. He does not argue long. He simply says he will do what he can from here. And from here, what he can do is hold the centre. Reports begin to arrive in fragments. Aircraft are launching. The airborne are on their way. The fleet is committed. Churchill listens to these updates and feels the strange helplessness that comes when a decision has already been made and the consequences have not arrived yet. He has always been a man who acts. Now he must wait. Waiting is a different kind of battle. He walks to a window, though the blackout makes it useless, and then back to the table again. His staff watches him carefully because Churchill's moods can fill a room. But this morning his mood is controlled, focused. He asks for the clearest possible updates, not the optimistic ones. He says he wants accuracy even if it is ugly, because ugly truth is still usable. As the hours move, the weather itself becomes a character in every message. Cloud layers, visibility, wind shift. The same invisible forces that threaten to cancel the invasion are now being watched like a heartbeat. Is the window holding? Is it closing? Churchill understands something few people will ever appreciate. In the first hours of D-Day, victory depends as much on tolerable weather as on human intention. Then come the first airborne notes. Drops are scattered, units are forming in pieces. Some objectives are being reached, some are not yet confirmed. It is not the clean execution the planners drew. It is the messy beginning of a real fight. Churchill exhales slowly, not in relief, but in recognition. This is what war always does to plans. A naval signal follows. The bombardment is underway. The fleet is in position. The schedule is holding closely enough to matter. Churchill's eyes return to the map. He traces the coastline again, and this time it feels less like a locked gate and more like a wall being tested for cracks. He speaks quietly, but firmly, as if stating a rule. The first hours will decide whether this becomes a foothold or a wound, because once men are ashore, the operation stops being a question of weather and becomes a question of reinforcement. Can the Allies land enough force fast enough to make the beachheads impossible to erase? That is the real race now. Churchill asks a single practical question, the kind he prefers in moments like this. When will we know? When will we have the first honest picture of the beaches? The answer is uncomfortable. Not yet, not for a while. The early signals will be confused, delayed, incomplete. The truth will arrive slowly, like daylight through heavy cloud. He nods as if he expected nothing else. Then he says the sentence that reveals what the weather report truly changed. It did not just threaten the plan. It forced the leaders to choose between two kinds of danger and then live with whichever danger answered first. Churchill sits back down, the cigar still unlit, and waits for the next report, because the next report will not be about forecasts anymore. It will be about the beaches. The first beach reports reach London like distant thunder. Not one clear sentence, but a stream of partial messages, naval signals, aircraft notes, scrambled summaries pass through layers of staff before they land on Churchill's table. He reads each line, then looks up as if expecting the room to add what the paper can't say. But the room can't add it yet. No one can. At first, the words are cautious. Landings underway. Time, 450 meetings. Resistance heavy in places. Progress uncertain. This is what war sounds like when it is still becoming itself. Churchill understands that the early hours lie by omission. They never show the full shape of disaster or success. They only show motion. He asks the same question repeatedly in slightly different forms because he is trying to trap clarity. Are we ashore? Are we holding? Are we building? And each time the answer comes back as a cautious yes, followed by a warning that the word yes is still fragile. Then the weather returns to the story again, like an enemy that refuses to leave the room. Visibility is variable. Seas are rough. Smoke and haze complicate naval fire. Churchill hears these lines and feels the original weather report tightening around the operation like a belt. This is what it changed, not just the date, the margin. It forced the invasion to begin with less forgiveness, less tolerance for mistakes, less time to recover from confusion. A new update arrives that sounds better. Some sectors are pushing inland. Some enemy positions are being bypassed. Some units are linking up. Churchill does not smile. He simply nods once, as if acknowledging a fact that must be protected from optimism. Because optimism is loud, and loudness leaks. Then comes the kind of message that changes a man's posture without changing his expression. One beach is in serious trouble, heavy resistance, slow movement. The report does not need dramatic adjectives to sound dangerous. Churchill recognizes the shape immediately, a hinge point. If a hinge fails, it does not just injure itself, it twists everything attached to it. He asks for confirmation because he knows early reports can exaggerate trouble or hide it. The reply is careful. The beach is being held. The situation is hard. Progress is slower than planned. That is all they can honestly say. Churchill turns to the map again, and this time he does not trace the entire coastline. He focuses on the section where the trouble is building. He says something that sounds almost cold, but is actually the most human thing he can offer in that moment. The first hours are always the worst. If they can endure the first hours, the invasion becomes harder to erase. Endure, that is the word. He calls for a tighter rhythm of updates, not to satisfy curiosity, to prevent panic. Panic grows when information arrives late. In leadership, the absence of facts is a weapon used by fear. Churchill knows this better than anyone alive. So he creates structure, scheduled briefs, clear channels, a steady stream of reality, even if the reality is ugly. Later that morning, he prepares the words that Britain will hear. Not the tactical truth, that is still too messy. The strategic truth. That Allied forces have begun the assault on occupied Europe, that the operation is underway, that the nation must hold itself steady while the first reports arrive distorted and incomplete. He refuses to promise an easy day. He refuses to pretend. Because pretense collapses the moment the first casualty lists appear. But he also refuses to let the weather write the narrative. In his private mind, the weather report is still the moment everything could have turned into delay, doubt, and decay. It forced the invasion to launch through a narrow opening, and that narrow opening is the reason the enemy is still uncertain, still reacting late, still struggling to see the full shape of what is happening. The storm did not stop the invasion. It squeezed it. And squeezing a plan either breaks it or hardens it. Churchill sits again, listening for the next wave of truth, not forecasts now, not charts. Truth measured in footholds, exits, and whether the beachhead is expanding. The room stays quiet as messages arrive, because everyone understands the same thing. The weather report changed everything. And now the day itself is answering whether the change was survivable. By the afternoon, the reports begin to sound less like panic and more like work. That is how Churchill knows the invasion is surviving. In war, collapse has a tone: urgent, contradictory, desperate. Survival has a different tone: measured, specific, focused on the next task. The messages on his table still carry trouble, but they also carry continuity. Continuity means the operation is not being erased in the first hours. He receives confirmation that the beachheads, uneven as they are holding. Supplies are coming in. Engineers are working the exits. Units are linking up where they can. The language remains cautious, but the pattern is clear. The invasion has passed the most fragile stage, when one bad hour could have made the whole plan look like an illusion. Churchill leans back and finally lights the cigar, not as celebration, but as a signal to himself that the day has moved from the edge of possibility into the harsh world of consequences. He does not claim victory. He does not allow anyone in the room to speak as if the war has been solved by a single landing. Instead, he speaks about the next problem, because that is what leaders do when they want momentum to survive. Reinforcement, logistics, continuity of pressure, making sure the foothold grows faster than the enemy can organize against it. And still, the weather remains part of every sentence. The channel is rough, the skies are imperfect, visibility shifts. Churchill listens to these details and understands the cruel irony. The storm that threatened to delay the invasion now has an after effect. It has helped preserve uncertainty. German decision makers, already divided and cautious, have had to react through imperfect information, through weather that interrupts reconnaissance and muddles timing. The same atmosphere that endangered the landings also made it harder for the enemy to see the full picture quickly. That is what the weather report truly changed. Not just the choice of a day, the tempo of the enemy. It forced both sides into a race where hesitation cost more than usual, and it forced decisions to be made with less certainty than any leader would ever choose willingly. As evening approaches, Churchill prepares his public words with care. He knows that if he overpromises, the truth will punish him later. He knows that if he sounds uncertain, the world will feel the uncertainty and magnify it. So he chooses the line that fits the moment, firm without fantasy. The Allies are ashore. The battle has begun. The outcome will not be decided in a single day. He makes it clear that what matters now is steadiness of the nation, of the alliance, of the effort. Privately, he returns to the weather report again, because he cannot stop replaying the fork it created. If the storm had arrived earlier, the window might have vanished completely. If it had arrived later, the operation might have launched under clearer skies, but perhaps with different enemy expectations. If the storm had been stronger, the landing craft might have been scattered beyond repair. If it had been weaker, the temptation to delay might never have existed, and the alliance might not have felt the full pressure of the decision. He understands that history sometimes turns on small shifts in wind and cloud, things no leader commands, and yet every leader must answer. He says quietly, what he believes is the lesson hidden inside the day. Leadership is not choosing on a perfect morning. Leadership is choosing when the morning is imperfect, and the cost of waiting is its own kind of disaster. The weather report forced that reality into the open. It made the war room admit something no one likes to admit, that even the greatest plans are hostage to timing, and timing is often hostage to nature. Late that night, the final summaries are still incomplete, but they carry one undeniable theme. The foothold is real. The operation is not a question anymore. The invasion has become a campaign, and campaigns are won by accumulation, by building strength day after day, until the enemy can no longer reverse the direction of events. Churchill takes one last look at the channel on the map and allows himself a single controlled thought. The door has been forced open. He sets the weather report aside finally, as if placing an adversary back into its file. It did what it could. It threatened the timing, narrowed the margin, and demanded a decision under pressure. But it did not stop the crossing, and in the end, that is what Churchill will remember when people ask what changed everything. Not a speech, not a slogan, a forecast, a narrow window, and the willingness to move when good enough was the only opening the world was going to offer.